He came back from the war, hoping for peace and a quiet life. But instead, he found a town drowning in fear. And when no one else dared to stand up to the evil, he stepped forward, alone, to protect the folks who couldn't protect themselves, facing Cross and his ruthless gang head-on. His only light in the dark was Ella, a saloon singer with a painful past, whose voice gave the town hope and gave him a reason to keep going. Welcome to Weathered Stories. This is the story of Jake Cunningham, a former soldier, and Ella, a woman he met right as the world around them was starting to fall apart. Together, they'll have to walk through fear, loss, and violence, just to try and bring peace back to Rock Falls. But when love begins to grow between them, they realize the fight ahead isn't just for the town, it's for each other. Can two ordinary people take down a brutal gang that's kept a whole town living in fear? And can love survive fire, blood, and everything that comes with standing up to evil? If you're ready to find out whether Jake and Ella can save the town now and hold on to each other through it all, then hit that like button and let's get into it. The train creaked to a halt with a long, tired groan. Inside, the conductor called out in a flat voice, "Rock Falls. End of the line." Jake Cunningham stood up from his seat. He pulled on a worn-out coat and picked up the same canvas bag that had followed him through mud, rain, and the heat of the southern front. The leather tag on it still showed the faint outline of his initials. He had no other luggage, and no real plans, either. Stepping down onto the wooden platform, he felt the boards sag beneath his boots. The air smelled like fried grease and old tobacco. A dog barked once in the distance, then went quiet again. Rock Falls wasn't a place that welcomed you with smiles. No kids running to meet the train. No women with baskets. No old men reading the paper. Just one water seller by his cart, who squinted at Jake like he half recognized him, then looked away. Two men near a barn exchanged a few low words and watched him pass. Watched a little too long. Jake kept walking down the main street. His boots crunched over loose gravel. He held his head high, but his eyes moved with caution, just like on patrol. Calm, but ready. Gracie's saloon was still at the same corner. The sign was fading, one of the front windows was cracked, and the music coming from inside sounded more like weariness than joy. Outside, a skinny kid sat slouched against the wall with a flask in one hand and a guitar across his lap. When he saw Jake, he froze. "Is that him?" Someone whispered from the bank's porch. "Looks like him. Cunningham. The one they said burned at Shiloh." Jake didn't look back. He'd heard whispers like that before. His uniform was long gone, but the soldier in him hadn't gone anywhere. A few blocks down, he saw the house. Small, wooden, with a leaning fence and steps that creaked from memory. Beyond it, fields, pasture, then trees. On the porch sat Vin, his brother-in-law, pipe in hand, newspaper on his knee. He wasn't reading it, just holding it. Vin didn't stand up right away. He looked at Jake for a long time, like he didn't quite believe it. Then he got up, set the pipe aside, and said, "Well, I'll be damned. You're actually alive." Jake gave a tired smile. "And you're still here. Somebody had to keep the lights on. Look after your brother. Feed the horses. Keep this old place from falling apart." Then Matt stepped out from the house. Older now, face lined with years and wind. But his voice still held that same warmth Jake remembered from when they were kids. "Jake," he said quietly. "Welcome home." They hugged. No words. Just a hard grip between two men who'd both seen too much. "But we're still standing." "You come far?" Matt asked. "Memphis. Some train. Some walking. Still doing things the hard way?" Jake shrugged. "Only way I know." Inside, the house smelled like stewed meat, with smoke and a little dust. Supper was on the table: potatoes, beans, some bread. Simple, but made with care. "Things VE changed around here," Matt said, pouring a glass of water. "I noticed," Jake nodded. "Town's gone real quiet. It's not the same. Folks are scared. We've got a new boss in town, and he ain't the law. He's got power, and people know better than to fight it." "Cross?" Jake asked. Matt nodded. "Iron Cross. Nothing's ever enough for him. And folks know if they speak up, they'll pay for it. Sheriff Dawson tries, but he ain't got the men. Or the bullets." Jake didn't answer. Just set his bag in the corner and took a seat at the table. He'd seen this kind of fear before, and he knew the smell of trouble when it was still far off. Later that night, he stepped onto the porch with a cigarette. The sky was dark, the town even darker. Off in the distance, footsteps broke the silence, slow and unsure. Jake looked up. At the end of the street, someone stood watching. A young man, barely out of boyhood, shirt half open, bottle in hand. He stared for a moment, then turned and vanished into the dark. Ben came up behind him. "You weren't expected here," he said quietly. "I figured," Jake replied. "But that don't mean you're not needed." Jake didn't respond. He just looked out over the town, and in his eyes, pain, memory, and the quiet tension of a man who's seen too much silence before a storm. Main Street in Rock Falls was waking up, slowly, like the town itself wasn't sure if it was worth the effort. Jake walked with a steady pace, eyes tracing the old storefronts. It hadn't been that long, just a few years. But somehow, it felt like time had stopped, then started moving backwards. The old blacksmith shop still stood across from the schoolhouse. But the bell that used to ring at dawn hadn't made a sound in months. Miller's General Store, its faded sign barely hanging on, looked more abandoned than open. On the porch sat Mrs. Miller, hands clenched tight around her knees, a smile stretched too far across her face. Her eyes weren't watching anything in front of her. They were staring straight through it. To the left, near the post office, Jake saw 3 men. One smoked. One chewed something. The third rested his hand on the grip of his revolver. All wore the same leather vest with a red patch on the shoulder. That was enough to tell anyone in town they worked for Cross. "Watch this," Matt said, stepping beside Jake. "You'll see how things are now. Just don't get involved." "Not yet." A shout came from the steps of the store. Old Mr. Miller stumbled out, clutching a handful of coins. Behind him followed 2 of Cross's men, one big as a barn door, the other shorter, but sharp-eyed and twitchy. "What's this supposed to be, old man?" the big one growled. "It's all I got," Miller rasped. "I swear on my wife's life. I need to buy milk. She's sick, please." The answer came fast, a punch to the gut. Miller folded, dropping to his knees. Coins scattered across the porch, bouncing into the dust. "God ain't gonna help you," the smaller one said. "Only Cross will. If you pay up." Mrs. Miller let out a sharp cry. The smaller thug turned to her and gave a mocking little bow, lifting his hat with a grin. "Ma'am," he sneered. "Maybe we take payment from you next time, huh?" No one stepped in. One neighbor pulled his shutters closed. Another hurried his child indoors. Silence fell over the street like a wet blanket. Jake took a step forward, but Matt's hand was suddenly on his chest. "Don't," he said quietly. "Not now. Please. This is what you call normal?" Jake muttered. "No. This is what folks call surviving." The bigger thug bent down, picked up a few coins, and tossed them back at Miller. "Here you go, hero. We'll be back in 2 days. Have it ready. Or next time, you won't have a store. Or a wife." Miller didn't answer. He just lowered his head and shook, arms tight around his stomach. The 2 men walked off like nothing had happened. The street settled again, as if the moment had never occurred. From the door of the saloon, Sheriff Dawson watched. Gray, hunched, worn thin. A man who'd already surrendered, but still wore the badge because no one else would. He and Jake locked eyes for a second, just one. That was enough. "Why doesn't he do something?" Jake asked. "He tried once," Matt replied. "They burned down his stable. Came close to killing his nephew. He learned. This town ain't run by law anymore. It's run by Cross." Matt motioned down the street. "That warehouse?" His men guard it now. They charge taxes for every crate. Post office? They read every letter. Bridge to the pasture? Can't cross it without their say-so. Even the preacher prays for the safety of our brave protectors, just so they don't torch the chapel. Jake's voice turned gravelly. "How long's it been like this?" "Almost a year. First, it was just Cross and a couple of guys. Then they started taking what wasn't theirs. Then people started paying to avoid trouble. Now, they got more guns than the sheriff. And more power. Power. Fear counts as power. Folks don't stand up to men who can burn down your home while your kids sleep inside." They stopped outside the butcher shop. Matt turned to him. "That's what you walked back into, brother. This ain't the town you left. This is a place where law is just a word. What's left is fear and pretending it ain't so." Jake didn't answer. He stared down the road, where the 2 thugs had disappeared. His face didn't move, but his jaw was clenched tight. His hands curled into fists at his sides, slow and controlled. The kind of tension that held back more than anger. "I can't just watch this," Jake said quietly. "And I don't want to bury you by the end of the week," Matt replied, just as soft. They stood there a moment. Then Matt added, "You'll get your chance. But not today." Jake gave a small nod. He didn't argue, but the look in his eyes said it plain. He already knew what he was going to do. It was a warm night in Rock Falls, but not a comfortable one. The air felt thick, like the sky was holding its breath before a storm. Everything looked calm, but something about the quiet had weight to it. Jake walked down the main street past shuttered windows and locked doors. Folks around here didn't linger once the sun dipped low. Too many reasons not to. He turned the corner and headed toward Gracie's saloon. Even from a block away, he could hear the muffled noise inside, low voices, glass clinking, soft piano notes drifting through. Jake pushed open the swinging door and stepped in. The place was dim, the air heavy with smoke, whiskey, and the smell of stewed meat. Nobody turned to look. A man at the bar gave him a glance, then went right back to his drink. Somebody chuckled over a hand of cards in the back. A few men sat off to the side in leather vests cross as boys. Same red patches on their shoulders. They drank in silence. Not the quiet of peace, but of power. Jake picked a table near the wall, back to the corner so he could see the whole room. The saloon was old, but kept tidy, still run with pride, it seemed. A young waiter came over, polite but nervous. Jake ordered stew, cornbread, and a beer, if it's cold. He just started eating when the room went still. Not because anyone cared. Just that kind of pause that happens when a habit breaks. A girl stepped up onto the little stage in the back. She was small, dressed plain, hair pinned back. Her face was calm, but her eyes moved fast, like someone always waiting to be interrupted. She sat at the piano and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The tune was simple. No flair. No tricks. Just honest music, like something your grandma might hum while peeling apples on the porch. Her voice was soft, like she wasn't singing for them at all. Maybe just for herself. But there was something in it, something quiet and real, that made Jake stop chewing and listen. No one else seemed to. A few men kept talking. One slammed his mug down too loud. Somebody let out a half-hearted whistle, just enough to embarrass her. But she didn't flinch. She sang to the end. When it was over, no one clapped. No one said a word. She stood, gave a small nod like she was saying thanks to herself, and walked toward the bar. As she passed Jake's table, their eyes met. He didn't look away, didn't pretend he hadn't been watching. He just looked steady and calm, not like a man checking out a pretty girl, more like someone seeing something they'd been missing for a long, long time. She noticed, and for just a second, barely a blink, something softened in her face. Not a smile, not quite, just the faintest flicker, like part of her wanted someone to stay this time. Jake raised his mug, took a slow sip, eyes still on her. As she passed, he leaned just enough to say, "Nice voice." She turned, paused. "Thanks," she said simply. "Most folks don't listen in here." I listened. I could tell. That was all. She moved on. And Jake sat alone again. But the saloon didn't feel as loud as before. Her voice still hung in the air. And in a town full of fear, it felt like, for just a moment, one note had rung true. The Cunningham place sat off the main road, past the pastures and a line of old barns, just far enough from town to feel quiet, even when things weren't. That evening, the sun had dipped behind the ridge, and the soft yellow glow of kerosene lamps filled the kitchen. It was a small house, but the warmth inside made it feel whole. Jake sat at the wooden table with Matt and Vin. They ate stewed beans, cornbread, and fried pork. The taste was simple, honest. But the moment, that was something he hadn't had in a long time. No gunfire. No barking orders. Just a quiet dinner. Just food. Just family. "Wheat didn't come in strong this year," Matt said, breaking off a piece of bread. "No real rain, then the heat scorched what was left. Cattle ain't faring much better," Vin added. "Grass is gone. If the winter drags, we're in trouble." Jake nodded, but stayed quiet. He chewed slow, like he had to remind his body how to just sit and eat again. "How about you?" Vin asked after a pause. "What's going through your head now?" "For now," Jake said, "just eatin'. "Well," Vin chuckled, "that's a start." Matt smiled, softer now, and looked over at his brother. Remember down by the river near Richmond, he said. When they pinned us near that fort? I remember. I figured I was done for. Then you pulled me out. Carried me 2 miles with a bullet in your shoulder. You still walked crooked for weeks after that, Ben added. I still feel it, Jake said, touching his leg. When the rain's coming, that ache starts creeping up. All three laughed. Quiet, but real. It wasn't much, but it was something. The laughter faded after a moment. After that fight, Matt said, I thought it was over. Thought we'd make it back, start fresh. Farming, families, just a regular life. He looked down. But now it's cross, Ben said flatly. Now it's all backwards. Jake raised his eyes. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, he said. But I can't just sit here. We figured that out at the market, Matt replied. But if you stand up to him, it won't stop with you. It'll pull us all in. This ain't a battlefield, Jake. It's worse. 'Cause nobody admits there's a war at all. And folks are too scared to even whisper. Silence followed. The only sound came from the wood crackling in the stove. Later, after dishes were cleared, Ben stepped outside for a smoke and Matt went to check the locks on the barn. Jake stayed inside, alone. He sat by the window, staring out into the night. The moon lit up the yard with a silver kind of quiet. He tried to sleep, lay back on the bed, closed his eyes. But the noise inside his head wouldn't stop. Faces flashed. Old comrades. Men who didn't make it. Flashes of gunfire. Screams. Smoke. The sound of the ground rumbling under him, never knowing if the next morning would come. He rolled onto his side. Exhaled. Got up and paced the room. From his bag, he pulled out a small box. Opened it. Dog tags. A faded letter. And a photo. A woman with kind eyes, smiling like she didn't know how far away she'd drift one day. He looked at it for a few seconds, then gently placed it back, closed the box, and tucked it away. Outside, the wind picked up again. Jake sat down at the edge of the bed. He wasn't tired anymore. That silence folks called peace. It pressed harder than any bullet. And the worst part? There was nowhere left to run from it. The sun hadn't climbed too high yet, but Rock Falls was already starting to stir. Jake headed into town, same as the day before. In one hand, a small sack of nails. On his belt, a pocket knife. And on his shoulders, that same quiet weight he carried everywhere. He planned to stop by the carpenter's shop, grab a few boards for fixing up the old pen out back. The path took him past the stables behind Gracie's, the ones where he used to feed horses with his father. He was nearly past when he heard a voice. A woman's. Soft, but clearly frustrated. Come on now. We talked about this yesterday. You stand still, I saddle up, and we're off. No drama. Jake paused and stepped around the corner. Ella, the singer from the saloon, was trying to tack up a nervous dark horse. It was slim but restless, jerking its head, pawing at the dirt, shifting its weight from side to side. Ella was flushed, a bit out of breath, hair falling across her face. Need a hand? Jake asked, not pushing. She glanced at him, like she was deciding whether to even let someone into the moment. Then she sighed. Honestly, she said, I'd take the help. Just no jokes about women and saddles. I know when to keep quiet, Jake said calmly, stepping closer. He moved slow, no sudden gestures. Laid a steady hand on the horse's neck, speaking low, almost a whisper. Easy there, girl. Easy. It's all right. The horse flinched but settled. Ella stepped back as Jake cinched the girth, adjusted the stirrup, and gave the reins a check. There, he said, stepping back. She's good to go now. Could ride her through a storm if you had to. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, Ella said, brushing her hair from her eyes. You're not. Some horses, like some folks, just need a little more time to believe you mean no harm. She gave a small smirk. Was that about her? Or me? Jake shrugged. Could be both. Might even be about me. A short silence followed, not awkward, just quiet. Comfortable. The morning sun warmed their shoulders. A breeze stirred the hem of Ella's dress. The horse chewed gently on its bit, content to take a break from the world. You were at the saloon last night, Ella said. I was. You listened. I did. That song of yours, it felt like it was trying to bring someone home. Or at least closer to it. She lowered her gaze, but a hint of a smile touched her lips. Most towns I sing in, nobody really listens. They just want a pair of legs and a laugh. You don't laugh loud? Only when it's real. Jake nodded. I'm Jake. Ella, she said softly, even though he already knew. I figured. Oh, you don't go unnoticed. She didn't answer that, just tilted her head slightly, like she was deciding whether to take the compliment. How long were you in the army? She asked. Long enough to forget the smell of fresh bread. Long enough to forget what it's like to hear someone sing just because they want to. She looked at him closely. And now I'm learning how to talk without giving orders. That's a useful skill, she said gently. Folks around here haven't spoken for real in a long time. They're either too scared or too tired. He met her eyes. And you? I'm tired. Of dust and trains and people who only see me as a voice or a dress or a way to run from whatever's chasing them. He started to say something, then stopped. Just nodded, slow, understanding. You coming by tonight? She asked, adjusting the reins. I sing again. I'll be there. She nudged the horse forward, and it moved easily this time. Jake watched her go. Her steps, the flow of her dress, the way the wind caught her hair. There was something quiet in it, and warm. He stood there another moment, then wiped his hands on his pants, though there was no dust on them. A bird drifted over the roof of the stable, and inside Jake, something lifted. Not all the way, but enough. And for now, that was more than enough. Noon settled over Rock Falls like a weight. Dry heat pressed down on the streets, heavy and still. Even the dogs didn't move, just lay in the shade, eyes half closed. The town felt frozen, until the whispers started. Something was happening on Main Street. Another confrontation. But this time, the name people were murmuring carried real weight. Sheriff Dawson. Jake heard the voices before he reached the square. He didn't run, but his pace quickened. That walk of someone who knows something's about to break. Near the bank stood a wagon, still hitched. Young Jimmy Holden, just a farm boy, had his hands cuffed and his face pushed into the dirt. Two of Cross's men flanked him. One was built like a barn, short beard, a whip at his hip. The other was wiry, with a scar running down his cheek and a rifle slung low. They were speaking to Sheriff Dawson. Not like they were asking. Like they were giving orders. I said let him go. Dawson's voice was calm, but solid. The kind of voice Rock Falls hadn't heard in a long time. And I said, the scarred one snapped, Hios. Cross made it clear. No pay, no farm. Today it's his wagon. Tomorrow, his land. Dawson didn't move. Hand resting near his holster, but he didn't draw. He just stood there, steady. Next to him, Pastor Thomas clutched his Bible. A few women held their children close. Everyone else just watched, silent. This kid's 20 years old, Dawson said. He works the land, feeds his mother, his little sisters. This debt you're talking about? That's extortion. You gonna arrest us, old man? The big one sneered. How many bullets you got left in that thing? One? Think that badge is gonna save you? Dawson didn't blink. That badge means people get to sleep at night. What you do? You scare kids and steal from the hungry. You think that's power? That's just cowardice. For a moment, the street went dead quiet. And then, like it had all been planned, a third man stepped forward. He'd been holding the horse's reins, unnoticed. From under his coat, he pulled a short-barreled shotgun. No words. He just pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like a hammer. Dawson staggered, clutched his side, then fell, slow and hard, into the dirt. Someone screamed. A woman dropped to her knees. A little girl started crying. One of Cross's men walked over, nudged Dawson's body with his boot. That's done. Show's over. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the preacher. Jake stood 2 blocks away. He saw it all. He heard everything. And he didn't move. Matt caught up from behind, grabbed his arm. Not now, he whispered. Not yet. Your time will come. But not now. Jake didn't answer. His face didn't change. But his jaw was tight. His hands clenched. Inside him, something had already broken loose. But outside, he was all steel and stone. The men didn't hurry. One walked over to Jimmy, tossed him the key to his cuffs. You're free, he said. But if you owe so much as a penny next time, Al, we come for your mama. Got that? Jimmy didn't reply. He just cried. Quiet. When they finally rode off, nobody followed. Nobody even looked up. It took minutes before a few men stepped forward. One covered Dawson with an old coat. Another took off his hat. Pastor Thomas knelt beside the body, whispering prayers into the dust. Dawson had been the last one still trying to do things right. The last one who believed this town could be saved with law instead of fear. And Jake, he didn't say a word, just stood there, looking at the spot where the sheriff had fallen, long and hard. Then he turned and walked away. But something had shifted, and it wasn't just rage. It was resolve. The old bridge over Dry Creek had seen better days. Boards groaned with every step, but they still held. It connected the edge of Rock Falls, where honest folks lived in weather-beaten homes without fences, to the town center. That part of town belonged to the quiet ones, the ones who paid cross with their crops, their backs, and their fear. Jake was coming back from the pasture when he heard it. A boy's voice. "Give it back. That's mine." Off to the left, near the start of the bridge, stood a kid, maybe 10 years old, skinny, wearing a torn vest. He clutched a canvas satchel, but a grown man in a dusty vest with a red patch was trying to rip it from his hands. One of Cross's men. Jake watched as the man yanked hard, knocking the kid to the ground. Dust flew up. The boy hit the edge of a plank, scraped his elbow. He didn't cry, but his lip quivered. Jake quickened his pace. "Hey," he called out, calm but clear. "Let the boy go." The man turned, gave Jake a look top to bottom, and smirked. "Well now," he said. "A war hero. What's this? Cavalry riding in to clean up our little town?" He stepped closer, still gripping the bag. "You don't want to get in the middle of this. It's family business. Kid's daddy's late on payment, so we're taking what's owed." Jake stepped within arm's reach. His hands were loose. His voice never rose. "He's just a kid. And you? You're supposed to be a grown man. Let go. Walk away." "And what if I don't?" the man hissed. "You think standing tall's gonna scare us off? Cross sees everything. Cross here." Jake didn't let him finish. The punch was fast, sharp, and clean, right to the jaw. The man staggered, lost balance, hit the boards hard on his back. The satchel spun loose and landed by the boy's feet. The kid just stood there, wide-eyed, frozen. The man groaned, rolled to his elbows, and spat blood into the dirt. "You got no idea who you just messed with, you son of a—" Jake cut him off, quiet and steady. "No, but you got no idea what it means to be a man." He turned to the boy. "It's okay. Grab your bag. Head home." The boy didn't move at first, then nodded, snatched the satchel, and ran. Just before disappearing around the corner, he called back. "Thank you, sir." Jake turned back. The man was standing now, wiping his mouth. There was no fear in his eyes, just anger. "You just made a choice," the man said, "and you're gonna pay for it." "I already have," Jake replied. "To myself." The man limped off, cursing under his breath. Jake stood on the bridge, alone. By the next day, the whole town had heard. Whispers, nods, long looks. Cunningham stood up to Cross. He hit one of them. He didn't flinch. He protected a kid. Folks in the saloon stopped avoiding him. Shopkeepers started nodding first. Children waved from doorways. But something else followed too. An edge. A question in the men's eyes. What now? Women locked their doors a little earlier. Vince said nothing, but his silence grew heavier. That night, Matt said just one thing. "Well, no turning back now." Jake didn't answer, because deep down, he knew that already. Knew it from the moment his fist landed. Miss Eleanor's house was always warm. Not because of the stove, it didn't work like it used to, but because of her. A silver-haired woman in her 70s. Sharp eyes, straight back, and kindness in her every movement. She poured chamomile tea into 2 chipped mugs. Her hands steady. "Drink," she said, with a knowing smile. "It won't chase the worry off your chest, but it'll wait patiently till you let it out." Ella sat curled up on the low couch by the window, wrapped in one of Eleanor's knitted blankets. She held her cup, but didn't drink, just stared out at the fading sky. Miss Eleanor set her own tea down and settled in across from her. "Speak, child," she said gently. "I can feel the storm inside you, even if you won't say a word." Ella took a breath, then another, and finally, she spoke. "I'm not used to this. Someone being there. Just being there. Not asking for anything, not pushing, not pretending." "Jake?" Eleanor asked softly. Ella nodded. "He's different. He's quiet. But when he looks at you, it's like he really sees you. And somehow, that doesn't feel heavy. It feels safe." She paused, then continued, her voice lower. I saw him on the bridge yesterday. Saw him stand up for that boy. Everyone else just stood there. But he didn't. He didn't think twice. He just did what was right. Miss Eleanor smiled. Men like that, they're rare. They don't talk much, but when they move, it echoes louder than any sermon. I'm scared, Ella whispered. Scared I'll start caring again. That I'll let myself believe something's possible. And then one day he'll leave. Or worse. Eleanor didn't need her to finish. She knew what Ella meant. That old pain, the one she never talked about. But it lived in her eyes. Loss isn't something you can guard against, Eleanor said quietly. But not living because you're scared to lose. That's a different kind of death. Ella brushed at her eye, trying to hide it. He asked if I'd come to the saloon tonight. Said he'd be there. I told him yes. But when I said it, my heart, it jumped. Like it wanted to run and hide. And what if, Eleanor asked, this time it doesn't fall apart? And what if it does? Ella replied. And what if it doesn't? They sat in silence. Outside, wind stirred the dry leaves. A dog barked somewhere off in the distance. Ella finally took a sip of the tea. It was bitter, but warm. Thank you, she said softly. I needed someone to hear me. Always, darling. Always. Eleanor reached out and gently touched her hand. Now go. Sing. Not for them, for you. And maybe for him too. Ella nodded and stood. The fear hadn't gone away, but alongside it now lived something else. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. The saloon was a little louder than usual that night. Maybe folks had drunk more than they meant to. Or maybe word had spread. Jake Cunningham had knocked down one of Cross's men, and suddenly people remembered what hope felt like. Jake sat at the same table by the wall, slow sipping his drink. His eyes were fixed on the small stage, where Ella had just sat down at the piano again. Tonight, her voice was different. Still soft. Still a little sad. But this time, there was strength in it. Not volume, something steadier, deeper. Like she was singing not for the crowd, but for those who truly listened. Jake listened. When the song ended, the applause was hesitant, but louder than before. Ella nodded, modest as always, and stepped down from the stage. She passed by Jake's table, paused just long enough to say, If you're not in a hurry to get home, I've got some stew on the stove. And fresh bread. Jake smiled, faint but real. Fresher than what they're serving here? By a mile. Well, I'd be a fool to pass that up. Her house was tucked behind the church. Small, with a porch lined by dry but still blooming flowers. Inside was simple, a wooden table, candlelight, shelves of old books. One left open on top of a dusty piano. The air smelled like herbs and warm food. Sit, Ella said, setting down 2 deep bowls. No music tonight. Just stew. And a little quiet. They ate in silence at first. Then small talk. The saloon. The weather. Old buildings and bad roads. But before long, the conversation deepened on its own. I left home when I was 19, Ella said quietly. Thought being on the road was romantic. Music, new towns, adventure. Turns out it's mostly dust, cold rooms. And folks who think your voice means you belong to them. You traveled alone? At first, no. I had a husband. Singer, like me. Charming. Funny. Turns out he wasn't the stay through the hard parts type. One morning, he said he was going out for bread. He took the money, my music sheets, and most of my trust. Jake listened, then nodded, slow. I had a brother in arms, he said. We went through hell together, Tennessee to Virginia. Shared everything. Saved each other's skins more times than I can count. Then one day, in the middle of it all, he just looked at me and said, I can't anymore. And he walked away. Ella looked at him, not with pity, just understanding. So now what? She asked gently. Jake didn't answer right away. But then he laughed. A quiet laugh. Not happy, but human. Like a man remembering he still could. What's funny? She asked, half smiling. We're a pair, you and me. Both scared of getting close. Both still sitting here. Together. Not saying much. And it's nice, damn it. She didn't say anything. Just nodded. They sat side by side. Not touching, but close. There was a spark. A warmth that didn't need words. Thanks for the stew, Jake said, setting his spoon down. Thanks for coming, she replied. He stood slowly, like he didn't quite want the evening to end. She walked him to the door. Be careful, she said quietly. There are too many eyes in this town. And you're not exactly invisible anymore. I can be, he said, when I need to. Not this time, Jake. Not anymore. He didn't argue. Just looked at her long, soft, then stepped outside. When the door closed, Ella stood there for a moment. Hands to her chest. Her heart beat a little faster. But it wasn't fear. It was something else. Hope. The night was heavy, thick, still, and breathless. Not a breeze stirred. The air felt like a wire stretched too tight. Everything was too quiet. As if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. Jake couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, listening for every sound. Matt and Vin had gone out to the barn checking on the horses before dawn. And then it happened. First came a faint smell of smoke. Then the low growl of a dog. And then, suddenly, light. Blazing, angry light, flooding the yard through the window. Fire. The barn's on fire. Vin's voice cracked the silence. Jake sprang out of bed, barefoot, bolting for the door. The barn was ablaze. Flames licked the roof, smoke curling into the sky. The wooden walls groaned and hissed as fire devoured them. Inside, the horses panicked, kicking, screaming, crashing against the stalls. Get them out, Matt shouted, already inside the smoke. He didn't hesitate. Just ran in. Matt. No. Jake yelled, but his brother was gone. Jake grabbed a water bucket, hurled it at a burning wall, and charged in after him. Smoke clawed at his eyes and throat. He saw Matt, coughing, dragging a bridle, trying to steer a terrified mare. A flaming beam snapped overhead, came down hard. Matt screamed. Jake got to him just in time, pulling him clear, dragging him outside to the watering trough. My arm, Matt groaned. Feels like fire, under the skin. His shoulder was blackened. Raw, cracked. Flesh angry and exposed. Jake said nothing, only pressed his hand over the burn, whispering. I've got you. It's okay. You're safe. While Vin rushed the remaining horses out, Jake hauled Matt back to the house. Half the town had gathered, but they didn't come close. They watched from a distance. Silent. Wide-eyed. Afraid. Someone whispered, it's a warning. That fire, that was for them. Ella arrived 15 minutes later. Wearing a wrinkled blouse over her nightgown, medical kit clutched in both hands. She dropped to her knees beside Matt. No words. Just swift, steady care. This'll hurt, she said, soaking gauze. But if I don't clean it now, it'll rot. Hold on. Matt clenched his teeth. Cried out once. Ella didn't flinch. Jake stood nearby, jaw clenched, eyes never leaving her hands. He shouldn't have gone in, Jake said hoarsely. This is on me. I knew they'd strike. Knew they wouldn't stop. And I still waited. Ella looked up at him calm, unblinking. You didn't light that fire. They did. But I didn't stop it. The room smelled of ash, alcohol, and grief. When Matt was finally asleep, delirious with pain and fever, Jake picked up his jacket. Walked to the door. Where are you going? Ella asked. He turned. His eyes steady. His face hard. I'm done watching. Done waiting. Done letting them burn what's mine. You're going alone? Better alone than no one at all. She didn't stop him. Just said, softly. Come back. Jake nodded and stepped into the night. Ash still floated through the air like black snow. But Jake didn't look back. He walked into the dark, slow. Steady. Certain. He wasn't afraid anymore. And he wasn't waiting. The night after the fire brought no sleep. Jake sat out on the porch with his revolver resting across his knees, listening to the wind play with the scattered ashes. Somewhere out beyond town, a coyote cried. But other than that, silence. That thick, heavy silence that comes when fear stops being a moment and becomes a way of life. By first light, Jake was on his feet. He passed Matt, still asleep, mumbling in fevered dreams, but breathing steady now. Ella was curled up in a chair beside him, wrapped in a blanket, her head resting against the wall. Jake paused, looked at her, grateful, then stepped outside without a sound. He knew where to go. First was Clint Holloway. Clint lived alone in an old wagon near the edge of the pastures, close to the hills. Once, long ago, he and Jake had stood shoulder to shoulder at Dick's Mill, and again at Harper's Ferry. Now Clint made horseshoes and road guard on the occasional trade run. Jake knocked on the wooden side of the wagon. "Wake up, Clint. Time to stop hiding behind iron." The door creaked open. There stood Clint. Early 40s, broad shoulders, patchy beard, eyes that hadn't rested in years. "Damn," he muttered. "Cunningham, you're alive." "Not just alive," Jake said. "I need men. Ones who still remember what it means to stand for something." Clint rubbed his eyes, took a step out into the light. "What happened?" "Cross. Burned the barn. Nearly killed my brother. It's gone too far." Clint didn't speak right away. Then, quietly, "I knew the day'd come you'd rise again. I'm in. Just tell me where to be." Next was Joe Murphy. Quiet. Steady. A former sapper who now fixed plows behind the blacksmith shop. He didn't ask questions. Just shook Jake's hand and said, "Figured it was time. I'm tired of their damn faces." Last, Jake went to Dr. Sam Bozeman. Old. Limping. A cough like nails in the lungs. He sat on the porch of his clinic wrapped in a wool scarf, reading a book with an empty mug beside him. "You knew I'd come," Jake said. "I may be slow, son, but I ain't blind," Sam replied. "I heard about the fire, about the sheriff, and the boy on the bridge." "Then I won't waste your breath," Jake said. "I need people who still give a damn, even if there's not much time left." Sam leaned back in his chair, coughed once, deep and dry. "Jake, you know I ain't who I used to be. I can't climb more than 3 flights of stairs without wheezing like a busted bellows. One more might be my last." Jake just nodded. "And yet you'll still get up." Sam looked out across the dirt road, quiet, then nodded slowly. "Because dying ain't the worst thing. Not when you're standing for something." He rose, with effort, but he stood. "Don't ask me to run," he said. "But I can still shoot when my hands ain't shaking. And I remember how to do it right." That evening, under the overhang beside Jake's house, they gathered. Clint, Joe, Sam. Vin stood off to the side, arms crossed, listening. Even Ella stepped onto the porch, holding a cup of something hot. It was for Sam. Jake looked at them one by one. "We're not soldiers anymore," he said. "We're not under a flag. No one's handing out medals. But folks in this town, they've got nowhere left to run. We'll do this our way. Not like war, but with the same purpose. We stand for the quiet ones, the scared ones, and the ones who didn't make it to this day, because we stayed quiet too long." Sam raised his mug in a silent toast. "To the ones who stood," he said, "even if it's for the last time." Silence. The wind blew, and without another word, they all understood. The clock had started ticking. The night before the fight was quieter than it had any right to be. The wind stirred gently through the trees. Far off, and all called, long and lonely. The fire had burned low, its glow casting soft amber light over the faces of those already asleep beneath their blankets. Jake lay near his saddle, cradling his rifle like a child. No one spoke, each man alone with his thoughts. A little apart from the rest sat Sam Bozeman, back against a tree, knees bent, breath steady. In his hands, a torn scrap of medical paper and a half-used pencil. He wrote slowly, not because of his age or the cold, but with care. His hands didn't shake. His eyes were clear. No fear, no panic, only peace and purpose. He murmured the words softly as he wrote, as if whispering to someone far away. "Mary, my dear sister, I'm writing this, maybe for the last time. Tomorrow we move. Jake's gathered a few good men, and I'm going with them. Not because I'm brave, because I couldn't sit still. I don't regret it. If this letter finds you, no, I didn't give up. Not all of us get to live long. But every one of us can choose to live right. I didn't walk away. I didn't turn my back. That matters more than one more year breathing. If Mama still has my old hat, tell her not to throw it out. I always liked how it looked on her. I don't ask to be remembered. Just don't be sad. I did what I could. I love you. Sam." He read it over once, then smiled faintly, folded the paper cleanly, with both hands, and tucked it into his chest pocket. Over it, he placed a photograph, worn and faded, 2 barefoot children, a brother and sister in a field of green, squinting at the sun. His fingers touched the picture soft, like a blessing, then let it go. He looked up. The moon was veiled by a pale wash of clouds. The stars were faint, but they were still there. He listened, not for danger, but for the silence before the storm. And then he stayed right where he was alone with all he had to say. And all he already had. The day came down heavy and gray. The sky hung like lead. The air was thick and still, like even the wind was holding its breath, waiting for blood. Jake stood on the ridge, eyes locked on the narrow road below. It ran between two low hills, leading from Cross's outpost straight to the town's central depot, the lifeline of weapons, rations, and, rumor had it, new cannons to crush the town into silence. Beside him stood the men he'd gathered. Only 5. Vince, solid, steady, worn from the inside out. Sam Bozeman, still bandaged, eyes cold and clear. Levi, a young farmer whose father had been taken in the night. And the Carter twins, silent, sharp-eyed hunters with steady hands and no words left for fear. Jake spoke low, steady, like the rumble before a storm. You know the plan. When the wagons hit the pass, Levi, Carters, you take the hill. I'll hit from the front. Sam, Vince, cover the rear. No shouting. No rushing. If it goes sideways, aim for the legs. No prisoners if they shoot first. Sam cracked a smile, voice rasping. Didn't come out here for mercy. Came for justice. Jake nodded. He could feel it now, the ground beginning to hum beneath their boots. The caravan was coming. 6 riders. 2 wagons. And riding point, Cross himself. Behind him, hand-picked killers. Everything was going to plan. As the lead wagon creaked into the rocky choke point, Levi squeezed the trigger first. One rider dropped hard. Then fire erupted from the ridge. Echoing shots. Screaming horses. Now, Jake shouted, leaping down into the fray. What followed was chaos. Bullets screamed. Horses reared. Voices tore through the dust. Cross wheeled his horse the second the trap snapped shut. Barked orders. Tried to pull back. One of the Carter twins made a break for the second wagon, caught a round to the chest, and dropped like a stone. Sam ran out into the open, ignoring Jake's shout to hold back. He carried his rifle in one hand and a bundle of dynamite in the other. He tossed it beneath the second wagon and fired, clean and perfect. The fuse lit. The blast split the wagon in 2, shattering wood and sending horses crashing into the slope in blind panic. Fall back. Pull out. Someone shouted in panic. Vince was holding the right flank, fending off 3. One crawled now, got shot and wheezing. Jake reached the front wagon, dropped the driver, grabbed the reins, pulled hard. The horses skidded to a halt. Smoke. Blood. Moaning. All around them, the end of a supply line. The end of silence. Cross saw it. Knew it. His face twisted. He screamed. Back. Everyone out. Leave it. And then he was gone, galloping into the trees with the few he had left. Out of 15 men, only 5 made it out. The rest, left broken in the dust. Vince stepped up beside Jake, breathing heavy. Carter's gone. The others hit, but Hangen on. Jake looked around. Sam, back there, covered in soot, but Logan, like a fool, said he hit better than in basic. Sam sat grinning on a rock, pressing a bandage to his leg. Good thing I wrote that letter, he chuckled. But guess I'll hang on to it a bit longer. Jake looked over the field. It hadn't taken long, but now Cross knew. Someone had stood up, and they weren't backing down. They heard us today, Jake said quietly. They know we're done whispering. He wiped the blood from his brow and stared into the woods. Cross had run, but Jake knew. This wasn't the end. It was just the start. The bridge was empty. Only the wind moved, threading between warped planks, pulling at last year's dead grass still clinging to rusted nails. The riverbed beneath was long dry, just cracked stone and silence. This was where it would end. This was where Jake stood alone, dead center. And he waited. They came slow. First 3 riders, then 5 more. At the front, just as expected, Cross. He rode like a man arriving for tribute, not battle. Calm eyes, cruel mouth, purpose in every step. He knew Jake had come for him. And still, he came. When they reached the edge of the bridge, the rest pulled up. Cross dismounted, boots hitting wood with a deliberate sound. He stepped forward slow, unhurried. Jake didn't move, didn't reach for the gun, just waited. Cross stopped a few steps away. Well now, he said. You again. Thought taking out a few of my boys made you judge and jury. Jake's voice was even. I'm no judge. Just a man done being afraid. Cross smirked. I was never afraid. That's why I'm still breathing. And you? You're standing here on this bridge, town behind you, my men in front. So what now? Jake nodded, just once. Behind them, an explosion. Then another. Louder. Closer. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the beams above. From the edge of town, a plume of smoke rose into the gray sky. That was Sam. He lit the wagon. Dynamite. Knowing full well he wouldn't make it out. Cross turned at the sound. Saw the smoke. Understood. His voice cracked. That was him? That kid. Jake's voice was low. He had more courage than you ever did. You sent him to die? No. He chose. Because he knew freedom cost something. Cross bared his teeth. So do you. You gonna pay with your life now. His hand moved, slow, deliberate, toward the holster. Not sudden. Almost like offering a chance. Jake didn't take it. He fired. The shot was clean. Right under the collarbone. Cross jerked, staggered. His eyes went wide, not from pain, but disbelief. He seemed stunned that it could end like this. He dropped to his knees. Fell forward. Face first. The bridge groaned under his weight. Silence. Jake didn't move for a long moment. Then stepped forward. Checked for breath. None. He stood over the man who'd held the town in fear and felt no joy. No relief. Only the weight of it. On the hillside, Cross's men had dismounted. They didn't move. Didn't speak. Then one dropped his rifle. Another followed. And then another. Rain began to fall. Not heavy. Just a whisper. But every drop felt like forgiveness. For the town. For the lost. For the one still breathing. Jake turned. Looked toward the road, where smoke still smoldered. Where Sam had fallen. There would be a stone there. He'd make sure of it. Silence fell, thick, heavy, like a blanket over the land. After the shot. After Cross dropped. No one moved. Even the wind held its breath. As if the earth itself was waiting to hear what came next. Jake stood on the bridge. His back straight, shoulders slightly lowered. The revolver trembled in his hand. His fingers still clutched the grip. On his face, no triumph, no rage. Only exhaustion. And blood, a slow drop trailing from his temple to his chin. The crowd at the town's edge didn't move. Some held their hats. Others stood with parted lips, like they couldn't believe it was real. No more Cross. No more gang. No more fear, which had hung like smoke over every doorstep. And then she stepped forward. Ella. In a simple light dress, hair slightly tousled. No hat. She walked slowly, not looking around. As if she could hear only one thing, Jake's breath. Her steps on the bridge boards were the loudest sounds in the world. And still, they made no sound at all. She reached him. Said nothing. Just took his hand. He didn't look at her right away. He only felt. She was there. Alive. Warm. Real. His fingers were still sticky with blood. But she didn't let go. She held tighter. He turned to her. Their eyes met. And in that gaze, there were no questions. No, why? No, what now? Only, I'm here. Far off, the wind rose again. It rustled the dry grass below the bridge, rattled broken planks, whispered across the saloon roof. But even that wind felt like silence. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't victory. It wasn't an ending. It was return. Jake exhaled. And without letting go of Ella's hand, he stepped toward town. She walked beside him. No words. The morning over Rock Falls felt different. Not quieter. Not brighter. Just calm. The kind of morning a town has when no one is afraid anymore. Dust on the road now rose from a hay cart, not bandit hoofs. The church bell rang not for morning, but to mark the start of a new day. People stepped onto the street not cautiously, but with purpose. On the roof of a small house on the edge of town, Jake stood hammering a loose board into place. Worn shirt, sun in his eyes, calloused hands. Below, Vin called up. Swing that hammer much better, and we'll draft you as a carpenter. Don't bother bringing your gun next time. Only if you're first in line for firewood, Jake replied, smirking without turning around. On the porch, a boy, 7 or so, scribbled in the dirt with a stick. Tommy, mumbling to himself as he drew. When he saw Jake coming down the ladder, he jumped to his feet. Dad, look, I drew you and a horse. And then you and Ella. Jake took the stick and looked down at the crooked figures. Smiled. You've got talent. Though maybe I'm not quite as bald as that guy there? Well, a little bit, Tommy giggled, hugging his leg. Jake ruffled his hair. Inside the house, the smell of baking filled the air. Ella stood at the stove, humming softly, not to be noticed, but simply because she could. Her voice no longer sounded like a plea. It sounded like it belonged. That evening, she sang in the saloon. Not for pay, not by request. She just stepped up when someone tapped a few notes on the piano and sang an old ballad. People listened. Some for the first time. Others as if it were the first time. And Jake? He was home. Up in the attic, he opened a small wooden box. Inside, an old photograph. The girl with the short hair and light eyes. The one he'd lost. The one he'd carried for so long. He held the photo for a moment. Breathed deep. "Thank you," he said, quietly, as if to her. "But I'm home now." He placed it back inside. Closed the lid. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel pain. Not emptiness. Only a deep, steady peace. A new day in Rock Falls carried on. No gunshots. No whispered fear. Only voices. Only life. And it was exactly the kind of life he had fought for. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next heartfelt tale from the Wild West. See you soon.